Hello and welcome to Firstpost Africa, where we get you the top stories from the continent and from across the world. I'm Joshua Barnes, live from the Firstpost studios. First, let's take a look at the headlines. India and Israel sign a new defence pact in Tel Aviv to share advanced technologies and jointly develop key military systems, marking a fresh step in strengthening their strategic partnership. The United States enters its longest ever government shutdown, surpassing the 35-day record as federal workers go unpaid and welfare programs hang in limbo amid a budget deadlock. Nepal's election commission says 125 political parties have registered to contest next year's parliamentary polls, the first since a mass uprising toppled the government in September. Bangladesh launches a nationwide reward scheme to retrieve thousands of guns looted during last year's uprising that led to the ouster of former PM Sheikh Hasina as authorities race to collect missing weapons ahead of key elections. And the Ivory Coast arrests a senior opposition leader, accusing him of calling for an uprising ahead of last month's presidential election that saw at least 11 people die in pre-poll demonstrations. Hello and welcome. Today we begin with the latest updates from Tanzania, where the country's security forces are accused of secretly dumping the bodies of protesters after a wave of election violence that may have killed hundreds. But before we tell you more about that, take a look at these videos. They show what transpired on the streets of Tanzania last week, especially in the country's economic capital, Dar es Salaam, which was most affected by the election violence. For context, let's give you a quick recap of what's happened. On October the 29th, Tanzanians stepped out to vote in the presidential election, but an election without opposition and President Samia Suluhu Hassan's slated victory irked people. The citizens took to the streets to protest an election which they believed wasn't free and fair. This led to a crackdown by security agencies with live bullets and tear gas canisters fired. Those protest videos came out after the government partially lifted its curfew and internet blackout restrictions imposed after the protests. Reports suggest an excessive use of force by security forces to quell dissent. The country's largest opposition, the CHADEMA party, claimed that the crackdown killed more than 800 people. And upping its ante against the Hassan government, the opposition has now accused the security forces of secretly dumping bodies. The party's vice chairman, John Heche, who was arrested on October the 22nd, has also been charged with terrorism.
Other reports that police are going in various hospitals collecting dead bodies of those who were killed during the protests. And we hear some of them are being buried in mass graves.
However, President Hassan and her government have not commented on the death toll so far. Instead, she blamed foreigners for the deadly demonstrations. In her first comments after taking oath as the president of the country, Hassan urged security agencies to ensure that normalcy returns.
Most of the youth who were arrested doing bad things came from outside Tanzania. In order to return the nation to normalcy, the way we used to be, quickly, the Committee for National Security and Regions and Districts, I want them to return the lives of our citizens to normal and to investigate what happened right away.
The election violence has rung alarm bells across the globe. Human Rights Watch has condemned the violent suppression of protesters. It urged Tanzanian authorities to ensure accountability by security forces, citing incidents of point-blank shootings.
Tanzania elections that have just concluded were clearly marred by violence. We've seen reports of abuses by the security forces, killings, the use of live ammunition, as well as tear gas against protesters. as well as the government using very restrictive internet blockades against the whole country, which really made it difficult for information to circulate in the country.
Meanwhile, a regional African bloc released a preliminary report on the election and said that it had fallen short of democratic standards. Others, including the UK, Norway and Canada, have also raised concerns, citing what they say were credible reports of a large number of fatalities. But the mounting global pressure seems to have had little to no effect on the Hassan government, which continues to curtail information sharing in the country. For more on this, we have with us Kanye Mugabeni, who is a political analyst from Johannesburg. Thank you very much for joining us.
A very good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me.
The Hassan government has acknowledged post-election deaths, but a small number compared to that alleged by the opposition. Do you think that these accusations of bodies being discarded could bring any accountability from the Hassan government?
Well, I think the Hassan government is in denial, but the facts are there. We've seen the dead bodies on the streets. We've seen the build-up to these elections being marred by extreme violence. And as you mentioned, over the weekend, as many as 800 Tanzanians were feared to have been killed. But those numbers are still being verified, even through the mortuary and hospitals, as more deaths are recorded. And what is very clear is that Hassan is an illegitimate leader of Tanzania. She has not been elected out of a victory that she won fair and square. Her opponents were arrested. CHADEMA has, of course, called it for what it is, and it is a sham. And what is also quite likely to happen is that these violent protests are, in my opinion, are not about to end, because if we look at countries like Kenya, Mozambique, Madagascar, Ivory Coast, there has been a lot of protest around leadership, especially illegitimate leadership that does not reflect the will of the people. And this is becoming a recurrent pattern. Leaders who've been in power and are no longer the people's wish. And we've seen Hassan has, the reports are saying that she has used extensive measures to ensure that she wins this victory. And as such, we know that even the information blackout through the internet blockage was trying to prevent Tanzanians from getting the visuals out there, from telling the world what has happened. But it is too little too late. The world is aware of what's happening. But the biggest shock for me, I think, has been the reaction of the African Union, which is a body that has been mandated to give direction and guidance according to democratic standards. And when we say democratic, we mean the will of the people. Countries in Africa should be hosting elections that are free and fair. Observers should be confident that the winners have been elected by the people. So for the AU to go ahead and congratulate Hassan, for me, I think is a big travesty of justice. And it just shows that the people of Tanzania are really on their own right now.
Yes, and let's build on that limited information that has been coming out of the country. We know an internet blackout has now been partially eased, but there still is a limit of information on the protests and response from security forces. What, in your opinion, does that say about the state of democracy in Tanzania?
Well, it's at its lowest. We're in a dictatorship. I think that's where Tanzania is right now. It's a dictatorship because if you have your opponents arrested, if you're having Tanzanians killed en masse, if you're having violent protests and the president simply dismisses them as dissidents from other countries who've come in to cause that disruption. So there's also an element of denial. The government is in denial about what is happening in Tanzania. So we are seeing democratic processes being flung out of the window in favor for more draconian and dictatorship practices, which I don't think, the people of Tanzania actually should tolerate, because Tanzania comes from, a very long history of political stability. Even for us in South Africa, Tanzania was a very critical country in terms of accepting a lot of our political activists who had fled South Africa under apartheid, and many of them found a home more in places like Morogoro in Tanzania, where we built schools and institutes, and the people of Tanzania were actually the people that accepted us and shielded us. So as a continent, we have a very important country here, and we're invested in ensuring that Tanzania does not go down into ruins, because that's where it's headed. It's headed into ruins because this violence is going to impact the economic activity. It's going to impact development. It's going to impact the empowerment of those that need it right now. And ultimately, it's going to impact the political stability of the region.
Yes, and Kanye, I'd like to look forward to end our discussion. You've mentioned the African Union, but what comes next from African countries and also international players? This in the face of protests, reported killings, and of course, the political controversy.
Well, I think that the countries, either neighboring countries or international countries, have a duty to take positions and to call it out and to appeal to Hassan, to say you are not the legitimate leader of Tanzania. It is important for countries to take a stand and to put pressure on Tanzania, whether that is by means of sanctions, whether that is by means of appealing to the AU to take a more hardened stance against Hassan and her leadership. I think whatever has to be done to save this country from going into ruins definitely has to be done. For instance, one can only just wonder if there's Western influence that has a hand in all of this, where Hassan is a party and she knows that, she stands to benefit from certain incentives of being in power. So there's all of those things that we have to investigate, whether Hassan is acting of her own will, whether there is a greater influence that has enabled her to win this election illegitimately.
Kanye, thank you ever so much for that summary and insight.
Thank you.
Next, we head to Sudan, the country ravaged by civil war, with peace seemingly way off in the distance. This as the Sudanese army said it would keep fighting against the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, or RSF, despite a US peace proposal. Sudan's defense minister made a statement after a meeting of the Security and Defense Council discussing this US proposal.
We thank the Trump administration for its efforts and proposals to achieve peace. Preparations for the Sudanese people's battle are ongoing. Our preparations for war are a legitimate national right.
Well, these comments come amid intensified efforts from the Trump administration to end the civil conflict that started in April of 2023. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt on Tuesday said the US was actively engaged, but added that there is a very complicated situation on the ground. This after US advisor to Africa Massad Boulos met with Arab League bosses on US efforts to halt the war, expedite aid delivery, and initiate a political process. Other Western nations like the United Kingdom have recently raised concern over the humanitarian situation in Sudan. This heightened by the recent capture of El Fasher by the paramilitary RSF. The city had been the Sudanese army's last stronghold in the western Darfur region. The city had been under an 18-month siege, with UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres highlighting global concerns.
Hundreds of thousands of civilians are trapped by this siege. People are dying of malnutrition, disease, and violence. There are credible reports of widespread executions since the Rapid Support Forces entered the city.
And Armed Conflict Location and Event Data, an organisation that registers real-time data on conflict, has sounded the alarm. ACLED said that a record 1,545 deaths were reported in the country last month alone. The independent organisation registered 3,000 casualties in total for the month. The monitor says since the war began in 2023, around 48,900 deaths have been recorded. Over 15,000 of those are in civilian attacks. Millions in Sudan have been displaced since fighting between the RSF and the army broke out. Humanitarian crises have been reported, with famine leading to starvation across the country. while the rape of women and children, murder of innocent civilians, and religious killings have also been reported. Since the capture of El Fasher by the Rapid Support Forces, further flashpoints of violence have been reported in regions eastward. Sudan is now effectively split into two parts, with the east and parts of the north controlled by the Sudanese army, including the nation's capital, Khartoum, while the west and southern regions, including El Fasher, are now under RSF control. This signal from the Sudanese army that it will continue fighting means further uncertainty for the people of Sudan. International peace efforts signal hope, but the reality on the ground remains devastating for so many in the Northeast African nation. Let's now shift focus to growing tensions between the United States and Nigeria. This over Trump's military action threat and the Christian killings claim. Now, China has become a party in this row, as it emphasized its unwavering support for Nigeria's sovereignty. Beijing asserted itself as Abuja's comprehensive strategic partner and warned against any foreign interference in Nigeria under the guise of human rights or religion.
As a comprehensive strategic partner, China firmly supports the Nigerian government in leading its people on a development path in line with its national conditions. China opposes any country interfering in other countries' internal affairs under the pretext of religion or human rights and opposes the frequent use of sanctions and threats of force.
China's support for Nigeria is more than diplomatic solidarity. It has economic aspects to it, as Nigeria is a key partner in China's Key Belt and Road Initiative, or the BRI, which aims to connect Asia, Europe and Africa through a corridor resulting in heavy investment by Chinese companies in Nigeria's infrastructure, energy and mining projects. A report suggests Nigeria is one of the top African destinations for direct Chinese foreign investment in sectors like oil, natural gas and solid minerals, including lithium and gold. In May 2025, the Chinese ambassador in Abuja met with the Nigerian Minister of Solid Minerals Development. After the talks, he announced that mining cooperation between China and Nigeria has achieved remarkable progress. According to reports, Chinese firms have invested over $1.3 billion in Nigeria's lithium processing sector since September of 2023. These investments are aimed at diversifying Nigeria away from oil and developing green energy-related minerals. Now, what triggered this Chinese reaction was Trump's accusation against the Nigerian government of failing to protect Christians. He threatened to halt aid and launch military action against Nigeria. He ordered to map out a plan of attack after his administration put Nigeria into the countries of particular concern list over alleged religious freedom violations. Nigerian President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has rejected these allegations. But this has not deterred the Trump administration. The White House has said that Trump is watching the situation in Nigeria very closely.
As the president stated, Michael, if the Nigerian government continues to allow the killing of Christians, the United States will immediately stop all aid and assistance to Nigeria and may take action to wipe out the Islamic terrorists who are committing these horrible atrocities, especially against innocent women and children. I don't have any further announcements on that for you today, but I can assure you the President of the United States is watching this situation unfold very closely, as is our Secretary of State, Marco Rubio.
With Trump's threat to Nigeria and China's latest intervention, the tensions in the African continent have put two global powers in confrontation, while Nigeria finds itself at the center of a geopolitical tug of war. And our final story is from Ghana, where a luxury fashion brand has managed to turn a traumatizing chapter from history into a fashion statement. Louis Vuitton's $3,000 bag, reportedly used at the Paris Fashion Week, has ignited a storm of criticism online. It has an uncanny resemblance to the Ghana Must Go bag, which is originally a cheap woven plastic tote that carries heavy historical baggage across West Africa. What LV calls a modern homage to global travellers looks to many like a tone-deaf rebranding of one of Africa's most recognisable and painful symbols of displacement. The bag, which reportedly once cost less than $10, was not meant to be chic. Rather, it signified the struggle of its users being forced out of their homes. The bag gained prominence in 1983 when Nigeria expelled around 2 million undocumented immigrants, and half of them were Ghanaians. Families, given almost no notice, packed their lives into these woven plastic bags and fled across borders. Decades later, Louis Vuitton's reimagined version swaps plastic for leather and monogrammed canvas. It adds brass fittings and a romanticized backstory about cosmopolitan resistance and gives it a $3,000 price tag. Social media didn't take this lightly. The internet came out swinging. One user wrote, "It shows how enslaved people are when it comes to knowing what's valuable and what's not." Another fumed, "It's always been like this. They steal from us, profit from it, and never give the credit." One person summed it up bluntly: "They're selling a brand, not a bag." And someone else joked, "Did anyone ever patent the Ghana must go design? Because what LV just did deserves a lawsuit." The controversy fits a familiar luxury playbook. From Gucci's blackface sweater to Burberry's noose hoodie, fashion houses in the West have repeatedly been called out for cultural insensitivity and for treating aesthetics from the global South as exotic decor rather than lived experiences. Louis Vuitton, for its 2012 and 2017 menswear collections, borrowed traditional Basutu blanket patterns from the Lesotho, with scarves and coats retailing for over $2,000. But the firm offered little to no collaboration or credit to local artisans. Another luxury retailer sparked online outrage by selling a plain canvas tote, strikingly similar to the common Indri grocery bag, for nearly $50. In India, the bag doesn't cost more than $1. The unbranded minimalist design, familiar to millions of Indian households, was being marketed overseas as a chic souvenir tote, despite its humble roots as a budget-friendly grocery bag. Over the last few years, Louis Vuitton has increasingly mined African visual cultures, weaving their motifs into high-end fashion under the guise of global storytelling. From Virgil Abloh's Kente-inspired menswear line to the Ghana Must Go remake, the brand's fascination with the global South seems endless, but its willingness to confront the context behind these designs remains minimal. In the end, Louis Vuitton's $3,000 bag isn't just a luxury accessory. It's a stark reminder that in the world of high fashion, pain can be repackaged as prestige, as long as it comes with a leather trim and a logo. Once a symbol of forced migration, the Ghana Must Go bag now struts the runway as a luxury collectible. It's a sobering image of how far a story can travel and how easily history can be stripped, stitched, and sold. That's it on the show. We will see you again tomorrow at the same time. Until then, thank you for watching.